Greetings, fellow truth seekers, and welcome to Genesis chapter 1. This is lesson 4 in our series, God Creates Living Creatures. Now, we had some kind of problem happen today with the audio, so we actually recorded today's Sunday school lesson, had the whole lesson on video, not a drop of audio. So after I downloaded it off my phone, lots of me walking around moving my hands, but it was really, really quiet. So we'll have to go back to the old way we used to do things, and that's me recording them here at my desk. I had hoped to get to verse 31. We did not make that. We just really introduced and made some opening comments on verse 27. And so we'll do that exact same thing tonight to make sure that the video lessons for those who missed the class stay in line with the lessons from Sunday school. So just a few things by way of reminder. Obviously, all of the lessons are up on YouTube and Rumble. You can also get them at our website. That's truth-seekers.net. If you scroll down from there, you can see the Genesis button. That takes you to all the Genesis lessons. And then I want to point your attention or draw your attention to the miscellaneous handouts button. There is where I place additional papers, discussion topics, or videos. This past week, I placed an additional video there, a discussion rooted in Genesis. What about the dinosaurs? About an hour-long discussion about the dinosaurs where I answer three questions, really. Does the Bible indicate that God created dinosaurs and man together? We deal with that one first. Then I ask the question, is there any evidence that would suggest that dinosaurs lived recently, thousands of years ago, and not millions? I tackle that. And then lastly, I tackle, is there evidence, secular evidence, historical evidence that men and dinosaurs lived together? And so obviously those are all sort of kind of the same question ultimately, but going at that question in a couple of different ways. So if that is a topic that interests you, please head out over to the miscellaneous handouts section of our website and grab that video, a discussion rooted in Genesis, what about dinosaurs? So again, we did not make 31, but we did make verse 27. So a quick review. If you remember day 1, we saw that God created matter, energy, time, and even space, although I would argue that space was more than likely created on day 4. But again, just being honest, there are some people who believe it was created day 1. But here's the key point. At the close of day 1, what we have is a water-covered planet spinning in space, illuminated supernaturally. God said, let there be light. And so what we have is this planet spinning. We have matter, energy, and time. And we have this water-covered planet being illuminated supernaturally. That's the end of day 1. That brings us to day 2. It was there, we saw in day 2 that God created our atmosphere. Now we saw the Genesis text and it seemed to apply that there's, or at least was, water in our upper atmosphere. God divided waters from waters, and that was the thing that he called the heaven. Now today, as we saw in our class some weeks back, our atmosphere has 5 divisions, 5 sections. Did it once have 6? And we can't be dogmatic about this, we can't be sure, but we observed it and kept moving on. But at the end of day 2, we have our water-covered planet spinning in space, illuminated supernaturally by God. It now has a primeval atmosphere, although it is still covered by a shoreless ocean. That brings us to day 3 by way of review. It's on day 3 that God creates dry ground and causes lush vegetation across the globe to appear. Now the language is really unique in Genesis of how God gathers and creates land. It says, quote, God gathers the waters together and dry land appears. Now the globe was covered by water. The waters were already gathered together, but the text says God gathers the waters together and dry land appears. And we couldn't help but wonder if maybe what happened is God drew a great portion of the water into subterranean caverns, maybe underneath our crust. Now we came at that not simply from day 3, although it's alluding to that, but multiple times in the Old Testament, the Bible tells us that God founded the earth upon the seas, God founded the earth upon the waters. And so we wonder if what God did here was pulled this water together in subterranean caverns. And as he was doing that supernaturally, you can picture it in mind, that you see the land rising up out of the water. Now the land's not actually rising, the water's being lowered, but the optics is still the same. Then after the dry land appears, God covers this planet with lush vegetation. And by the end of day 3, we have full-grown trees. We have fruit trees bearing fruit. Now, the language within Genesis seems to imply this happened like a fast-forward movie, like one of those time-elapsed movies. Like the seeds sprouted, and then the tree began to grow really fast, all the way to growing to its near maximum size, and even producing fruit all in one day. We speculated that quite possibly, here's a planet with smaller oceans because so much of the water is likely under the crust, lush vegetation, an atmosphere, spinning in space, being illuminated supernaturally by God. And that brings us to day 4. And it's on day 4 that God creates our sun, our moon, and the stars in our heavens. Now, although it's not stated here, but it's stated numerous times in the Old Testament, when God created, he stretched out the heavens. And so it's here, if indeed God created space on day 4, that likely he stretched out the heavens. What is unique about that is, modern science would tell us, based on observances they make with the Hubble Space Telescope, that the creation is still expanding to this day. It was not until the 1920s, like 100 years ago, that the possibility of an expanding creation was even considered by science. Up to then, it had always been a static creation. But the entire time, in 700 BC, God told us that he stretched out the heavens. But at the end of day 4, we have a planet ready for life. Now, last week we talked about the amazing statistical improbability of a planet ready for life ever happening by chance. We talked about the fine-tuning in our creation, in our universe. Equally, we talked about the amazing tuning of our planet, the amazing sun and our distance from the sun, and even our moon. And if you remember, as we talked about all these things, the fine-tuning of these key constants, our location in the Milky Way galaxy, our location in our solar system in reference to our sun, the fact that we have a very large moon. I told you all these things required for life. We are indeed very, very, very lucky. Now, of course, I said that tongue-in-cheek. We recognize that God created this planet to place us here. But at the end of day 4, we have something that looks like this. We have our planet ready for life. Prepared for life, prepared for those things that have the breath of life. And that brings us really now to move into our new topic, the creation of living creatures. Picking up in verse 20, and God said, let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens. So God created the great sea creatures, and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth. And there was evening, and there was morning, the 5th day. We now have our atmosphere. We have a hydrosphere, our more than likely smaller oceans, a lithosphere, the land mass, and we have the biosphere. We even have outer space, which is now formed and it's finished. God has now created a proper tent for man and animals to dwell in. He has formed it and he is about to fill it. He has placed this privileged planet in exactly the right distance from exactly the right kind of sun to support and sustain life. He's placed us in the perfect position within the Milky Way galaxy, a spiral galaxy. not only to survive, we're not near the center, we're not even in one of the spiral arms, but we're between spiral arms, in a place where we can not only thrive, but observe the creation that God has made. So having completed all that is necessary by way of non-living materials, the creation is now ready for the introduction of those things that have the breath of life. If you remember, the creation was tohu vabohu, unformed and unfilled, unformed and unfinished. Well, it is definitely formed now, and it is ready to be filled. Once again, God speaks, and instantaneously, supernaturally, creation occurs. This time, for the first time, it's physical life, things that have a mind, things that have a will, things whose behavior is unpredictable. Life, the breath of life, living creatures. Now, as you think about this, we need to pause here and make sure we fully appreciate what we're reading. We read some of this stuff and we read it real fast. God created these animals and that's cool. But what God just did is amazing. It is breathtaking. It is spellbinding in its complexity. Now I want to pause and talk about the current evolutionary theme and what it teaches about what we're reading about. So if we were to try to encapsulate the current evolutionary theory, especially as it relates to our planet and life, the story would go something like this. A long, long, long time ago, there was a planet. It had water on the top in various lakes, rivers, or even a massive ancient ocean. Within those waters, under the primitive atmosphere, processes occurred, and amazingly, amino acids began to form across the primordial soup, the ancient oceans of this planet. And these amino acids, not only did they begin to form, but they began to drift around this massive primordial soup. And what's amazing is then they begin to bond and form proteins. And these proteins begin to drift around this primordial soup, and then something really incredible happens. Somehow, a cellular membrane surrounded hundreds of these proteins, captured them as well as other key elements the cell would need, and thus the first cell is born. But the story doesn't end right there. Over more and more and more time, this cell, through chance and random processes in time, creates various machines within it, RNA and DNA, and at some point, this cell, in an amazing stroke of just luck, comes to life. And more than that, this living cell is able to replicate itself. Thus, this single living cell can now replicate itself and create more living cells. All of this on the face of our planet. All of this is in the primordial oceans millions and billions of years ago. And this initial single cell that would replicate itself would ultimately be the genesis of all life on this planet, as all life could trace its way back, according to the current evolutionary theory, to this one amazing cell. That's quite a story. So let's tease that out for a minute. Just pretend with me that the Earth is indeed here through random chance processes. We skip all the fine-tuning, skip all the discussion about the sun and the moon and all these fine-tuned constants. Let's just pretend that the Earth is here by chance. Let's pretend if it's not covered in water, it has a lot of water. What's it going to take to get life? Can you pretend with me? Now, as you begin to think, okay, life, I'm going to need life. What do I need for life? Well, the immediate thing that comes to me is, let's deal with that cell. We need that cell. We need an animal cell. So there we go. We're going to need to create this. Now, I'll be honest with you, as I look at something like this, the first thing that goes through my mind is, hey, can I even pronounce all these things correctly? But there's something bigger than that here. We can't start here. This is super duper complex. This is a factory. This is a miniature factory. We can't start here. This is a typical animal cell, but yikes, we cannot start here. This got real deep and real quick. So let's back up a bit. What are the basic building blocks for the cell? I mean, what are the key building blocks for the cell? Well, if you Google that, it'll tell you that the building blocks for a cell are carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. Okay, so now we're getting to something that I can grab hold of. I don't need to start at the cell. I can start right here. In fact, I can start right with proteins because I understand, at least to a small degree, how proteins are formed. So a basic protein is constructed of 150 amino acids, with complex proteins being hundreds and even thousands of amino acids. But let's just stick to, for the sake of our discussion, basic protein. Now, amino acids are organic compounds that contain both an amino and a carboxylic acid. There are over 500 different amino acids, but there are 20 that function as building blocks for protein. So let's pretend we're standing here on the Earth, this Earth that was formed by chance, and we're looking off onto this massive ocean. What are the odds of forming one of these basic proteins, 150 amino acids? Now let's make this as easy as possible to form this basic protein. We're going to fill the oceans with all 20 amino acids. We're going to make sure that we don't allow the sun to destroy any of these amino acids and proteins. We're going to, as they form, we're going to make sure that the water cannot break up any of these proteins as they attempt to form. So let's just follow that thought. Let's set up the best possible scenario for creating a 150 amino acid protein, a basic protein. What is the likelihood of something like that happening? That's really our question. So if you believe in chemical evolution and through random chance protein could form in this supposed early ocean, or this, as evolutionists call it, this primordial soup here on Earth, what is that statistical likelihood? That's the answer that we want to go after. So this next video clip is from the video Unlocking the Mysteries of Life, Origin. How did life begin here on Earth? And that is really what we want to get at. Can we create a protein, and how long would it take?
When applied to the origin of life and the random formation of large biomolecules, probability theory clarifies the limitations of chance as a creative agent on the primordial Earth. For example, what are the odds a single protein could form exclusively through the blind interactions of chemistry? Our target is one smaller than average molecule made from 150 amino acids, each aligned to ensure a folded chain. Researchers have calculated that on the ancient Earth, the probability of success was 1 chance in 10 to the 164th power. That's 1 correctly sequenced protein chain for every 100 million trillion 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 failed attempts. But despite these enormous odds, some theorists argue that given enough time, anything is possible. Okay, let's test the validity of this opinion. We'll begin by establishing an ideal environment for chemical evolution, an imaginary world that will provide chance with every opportunity to succeed. First, we stock the oceans to capacity with amino acids. That means all the atoms on Earth, including its entire supply of carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, and sulfur, are available to form 10 to the 41st complete sets of the 20 types of amino acids used to build proteins. Then we'll alter the laws of nature to protect these building blocks from the destructive rays of ultraviolet light and chemical contamination in the primordial soup. Now let's turn the chemistry loose and see what happens. The amino acids start bonding furiously. In our experiment, an entire chain of 150 units self-assembles in only 1 second. since all 20 types of amino acids are available. At the majority of sites, there is a 5% or 1 in 20 chance the correct molecule will align in the chain. If the sequencing is incorrect, the chain is immediately destroyed and a new assembly begins. Throughout the planet, 6,000 million, billion, trillion attempts will take place every minute. That means in 4.6 billion years, the oldest estimated age of the Earth, the number of chains that don't fold will exceed 10 to the 58th power. It's a staggering total, but nowhere near 10 to the 164th. The trials necessary, on average, to build a protein of 150 amino acids by chance. So if undirected chemistry can't produce our coveted molecule during the entire history of the Earth, then how much time would have been needed?
So we created the perfect primordial soup. We altered the laws of nature to protect those amino acids. We had them bond at an amazing rate of 6,000 million, billion, trillion attempts every minute across the planet. And in spite of that, we're not even close to statistically building on average one single 150 amino acid protein by chance in the entire history of the Earth. How long would it take? We wouldn't have one built in the imagined history of the creation at 13.6 or 13.7 billion years. So at the jump, we are stuck just creating one simple 150 amino acid protein through time and random process. It is simply impossible, and we are nowhere close to a cell. But the problem is much larger than simply creating one protein by chance. We need hundreds and indeed thousands of proteins created simultaneously and swept together in a cell membrane, all at the same time. Is that even possible? I mean, one protein is not possible. Is this possible? This next video clip is from Lee Strobel's The Case for a Creator. In it, biologist Dr. Jonathan Wells extends the discussion from proteins to cells.
No matter how many molecules you can produce with early Earth conditions, plausible conditions, you're still nowhere near producing a living cell. And here's how I know. If I take a sterile test tube and I put in it a little bit of fluid with just the right salts, just the right balance of acidity and alkalinity, just the right temperature, the perfect solution for a living cell, and I put in it one living cell. This cell is alive. It has everything it needs for life. Now I take a sterile needle and I poke that cell, and all its stuff leaks out into this test tube. You have in this nice little test tube all the molecules you need for a living cell. Not just the pieces of the molecules, but the molecules themselves. And you cannot make a living cell out of them. You can't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. So what makes you think that a few amino acids dissolved in the ocean are going to give you a living cell? It's totally unrealistic.
Yeah, and so again, you see the point. It doesn't matter how many molecules you have, you're nowhere close to life. And again, we couldn't even create one in the span of the supposed time of the entire universe. And did you hear what he said? We cannot put Humpty Dumpty back together again. I asked the class, you know, if you think about they estimate that the human body has about 30 trillion cells in it. So think about all the people and all the animals walking around the planet. How many cells are there on the planet? The number's unimaginable. It's just unimaginable. 10 to the something very, very ginormous. And I said, you know what every cell has in common? All of these cells walking around on the planet. Every one of them was created by another living cell. That's what all of them have in common. We cannot, even to this day, put Humpty Dumpty back together again. And we're to believe that Humpty Dumpty got assembled in the first place by chance and random process. It is a stretch of the imagination. Now, this last video clip deals with the molecular machines of the cell. In class, this clip didn't run. It should run today. So we didn't actually watch this in class. I actually just talked about it a little bit. But this is biochemist Dr. Michael Behe, and he's discussing the amazing complexity that exists within each cell.
Throughout the second half of the 20th century, spectacular technologies revolutionized scientific understanding of the cell, the basic unit of life. During an interview with biochemist Michael Behe, Strobel learned how this new knowledge has shaken the foundations of Darwin's theory.
In the 19th century, when Darwin was alive, scientists thought that the basis of life, the cell, was some simple glob of protoplasm, like a little piece of jello or something that was not hard to explain at all. But with the hard work of science in the 20th century, we've seen that the cell is far from simple. It's got very complicated molecular machines and things that are very resistant to Darwinian explanation.
Michael Behe has devoted his career to the study of the design and operation of the cell. He has also written extensively on the biochemical challenge to evolution.
Most people have no idea of how small and complex cells are. A typical cell from you or me, called a eukaryotic cell, is probably 1/10 of the size of the head of a pin. And yet in that single cell, there are about 3 billion units of DNA making out the chromosomes. And those 3 billion units make the molecular machines of the cell, literally machines that make the cell work.
With computer animation, we can enter the cell. Here, the staggering complexity of its molecular machinery is clearly seen.
It's like going into an automobile factory. The factory has a large number of machines. The parts have to fit together in very specific ways to do their jobs, and if things go wrong, the cell is in big trouble. And just one cell is enormously complex, but humans, you and I, are made from trillions of cells, and those trillions of cells have to fit together in the right way and do their own job. Darwinism was a lot more plausible when we were thinking about globs of protoplasm than it is when we're thinking about molecular machines.
Each of these biochemical machines is a masterpiece of engineering and nanotechnology. They are essential to functions as vital and diverse as vision, photosynthesis, and the production of energy in the cell.
So knowing what we know today, it is simply untenable to believe that life evolved from non-living chemicals by chance. It's not an unlikely proposition. It is, in my opinion, and the opinion of many scientists, an impossible proposition. Dr. Stephen Meyer, now he is a Christian, but here's what he says. No, quote, no serious scientist believes that life happened by chance. Francis Crick, the co-founder of DNA with Watson, as well as, I believe, the one who came to understand that it was this 4-letter language about 3 years later there in DNA. He said this, quote, an honest man, armed with all the knowledge available to us now, could only state that in some sense, the origin of life appears at the moment to be almost a miracle. So many are the conditions which would have to have been satisfied to get it going. And let's be honest, Francis Crick is not a Christian. Dr. Michael Denton. Although the tiniest bacterial cells are incredibly small, each is in effect a veritable miniaturized factory containing thousands of exquisitely designed pieces of intricate molecular machinery made up of 100 billion atoms. Far more complicated than any machine built by man and absolutely without parallel in the non-living world. As I told the Sunday school class, Ford Motor Company would love to be able to produce a production facility like one cell. You and I should stand in awe when we consider what our amazing God did when he created life. Whether we are gazing into the stars or gazing into a cell, it's not only the heavens that declare the glory of God, but even at the cellular level, what we have is the glory of God being declared. Back to verse 20. So two things I want you to catch here. I love, look at the language. Let the water swarm with living creatures. So here we have nephesh, living creatures. So plants are alive in a sense. They don't have the breath of life. They don't have consciousness like the animals do. And here God creates this conscious life, and he starts in the oceans. Now in my mind, I picture calm oceans, being rocked by the tides as the moon is revolving around the earth. And at the command of God, the waters begin swirling, and life is created instantaneously, supernaturally, and the oceans are filled with life, teeming with life in a second. Now, this is not some tiny single-celled organism that advances over thousands or millions of years to become a multi-celled organism, to ultimately become more and more complex organisms, to become some fish. No, this is a sovereign, supernatural God speaking, and in a moment, the waters of this planet are teeming with life. 1 minute, maybe all there was algae, maybe not. But the next minute, all forms of aquatic life in an instant. Verse 20 goes on to say, and let the birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens. What did this look like? I can only imagine. Birds filling the heaven. 1 minute nothing, and now birds, fully grown, fully functional, able to fly, flying in the expanse of the heavens. This is not one type of an animal slowly picking up wings and the ability to fly over thousands or millions of years as death leads the victory to animal flight. No, this is a supernatural God, creating in a second the diversity we see in the biological class we call aves today, in the bird kind. Verse 21, so God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Again, we see each type of organism has its own unique DNA structure, and it can only reproduce after its kind. Here we see that God creates barriers, a line between the kinds of things. If it's the same kind, it possibly could reproduce. If it is a different kind, it can never reproduce. Now, the pastors talked about this many times, but I want to bring it up here again. It's an important principle as we read the scriptures. The scriptures do not have a method to highlight or bold or underline or add an exclamation mark. What the scriptures do is repeat something. 10 times here in chapter 1, this phrase that each one reproduces after its kind is stated. 10 times. Not one, not twice or 3 times, 10 times each according to their kind. So I asked the class, what do you think God is trying to tell us? Well, it's obvious, right? They each reproduce after their kind. Now, evolutionary dogma says that all living things are connected by a common ancestor. This is refuted by the reality we see in our world, the overwhelming evidence from the fossil record, and more importantly, and quite possibly most importantly, what God says as recorded by Moses. But it's refuted by the evidence. If macroevolution were true, we would find billions of examples of things transitioning in the fossil record, some successful, some failures. We do not. We have a handful of debated fossils, and that's it. We should find millions of transitional forms. It's also here in verse 21, Moses provides some additional commentary. Notice God created the great sea creatures. Now, I don't know what comes to your mind when you think about a great sea creature. Maybe it's a blue whale up to 100 feet, maybe a sperm whale up to 60 feet, giant squid, giant octopus, massive oarfish. The two Hebrew words here, the first one, gadol, means great, large, big, or massive. Okay, so we got it. And then the word translated as 2 English words, sea creature, is actually the Hebrew word tanin. It's used 28 times in the Hebrew Bible, and rather than explain to you the various things the word can mean, I'll just show you some examples of the word. Psalm 74:13, you divided the sea by your might. You broke the heads of the Tanin, of the sea monsters on the waters. Isaiah 27:1. In that day Yahweh, with his hard and great and strong sword, will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, Leviathan, the twisting serpent, and he will slay the Tanin, the dragon that is in the sea. Isaiah 51:9. Awake, awake, put on strength, O arm of Yahweh. Awake, as in the days of old, the generations of long ago. Was it not you who cut Rahab in pieces, who pierced the Tanin, who pierced the dragon? Just so you know, it is at least interesting. As I told you, this word Tanin is used 28 times in the Hebrew Bible. In the King James translation, 21 of those times is translated dragon, 3 times serpent. The ESV uses dragon, it uses jackal, serpent, so it uses different words, but doesn't use dragon near as much as the King James translators did. But here's what I would suggest, at least in part. What Moses is talking about, as he talks about the great sea creatures, are the dragons, the dinosaurs that were also among those creatures that swim in our oceans, created by God. Now, in the dinosaur video, I deal with one of those. I deal with Leviathan from Job 41. And so I would encourage you, time permitting, to check that out. But it's here, I would argue, that the aquatic dinosaurs were also created, and each of them reproduces according to its kind. And we end with the declaration from God that he continues to give us, it was good. Now, I'll be honest with you, when we consider the complexity of life, when we consider even just the amazing information contained within the cell, it is more than just good. It is really, really amazing. Verse 22, and God blessed them, these animals, and said, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let the birds multiply on earth. And there was evening, and there was morning, the 5th day. So something new happens here. God blesses them, his blessing to be fruitful and multiply, to fill the seas and to fill the air, to fill the earth with birds. This is the first time God has blessed any of his works. And it's here on day 5 that he blesses the birds as well as the fish. And then in verse 23, we have that 5th repetition, that the evening and the morning were the 5th day. Thus the 5th day comes to a close. The planet is now teeming with plant life, bird life, aquatic animals. Day 5 ends with a planet teeming with life. Verse 24. And God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things, and beasts of the earth according to their kinds. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to their kinds, or according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Now look at verse 24. Let the earth bring forth living creatures. Now, can you imagine what this would have looked like for the earth to bring forth living creatures? You know, my mind starts to paint pictures. Did the animals just sort of step out of the dirt? Did they materialize out of the dirt? Did they just pop into existence? I hope God video recorded this, because I would love to see what it looked like here on day 6 as God created the land dwellers. I'd love to see it all. But notice, you see the repetition. Each one of these creatures reproduces according to his kind. Now, it is interesting. These land-dwelling animals are broken down really into 3 major groups: livestock, creeping things, and beasts of the earth. Again, each reproduce according to their kinds. Now, although the Bible does not say it here, we know of another dinosaur, in this case a land-dwelling dinosaur, that also comes up in the book of Job. So we will look at him real quick, but before we do, let me set the stage. God has showed up in chapter 38, and he's begun to rapid-fire questions, rhetorical questions, to Job, reminding Job of his awesomeness and his power. In fact, by my count, between 38 and chapter 40, God asked Job 61 rhetorical questions, and that could be off. I may have missed 1 or 2. But let's pick up where it starts in chapter 38. Then Yahweh answered Job out of the whirlwind, and he said, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? A rhetorical question. God is not looking for an answer. Dress for action like a man, and I will question you, and you make it known to me. The next rhetorical question. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determines its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? And again, all the way from 38 to 40, these rhetorical questions just come. But ultimately in chapter 40, God brings up a massive animal. And the reason God brings it up is to remind Job that as massive as this animal is, and as amazing as this animal is, God is the one who created that animal. So let's pick up this discussion in Job 40. We'll pick up in verse 15. Behold, look, see, Behemoth, which I made as I made you. He eats grass like an ox. Behold, his strength is in his loins, his power in the muscles of his belly. He makes his tail stiff like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are knit together. His bones are tubes of bronze, his limbs like bars of iron. He is the first, the chief, the biggest, the most important, the most powerful, whatever you want to make of that, of the works of God. Let him who made him bring near his sword, for the mountains yield food for him where all the wild beasts play. Now, if you have a study Bible, or even a Bible with marginal notes, more than likely it says this was probably an elephant or a hippopotamus. Well, let's look at the description. The strength of this animal is in his loins. The power of this animal is in the muscles of his belly. He makes his tail stiff like a cedar tree, a massive cedar tree. The bones, his bones are tubes of bronze. His limbs are like bars of iron. He's the first of the works of God. Oh, and by the way, I made him as, and we could even translate it, I made him when I made you. Now again, many Bibles have a marginal note that this is a elephant or hippopotamus. Well, here's what I would say. That is not like a cedar tree. Equally, as we think of this animal, that is not at all like a cedar tree. What I think Job is being presented with by God is a sauropod dinosaur. And what I find interesting about this beast that God is describing, Job does not go, I don't know what you're talking about, God. I have no idea what you're going off about with this animal you're talking about. Now, was he talking about a brachiosaurus? Possibly. 80 foot long, 80 tons. A Ceroposeidon? Maybe. A little bit longer, not quite as heavy. Argentinosaurus, 130 foot long and up to 100 tons, 110 tons. Again, I think we're being presented with a land-dwelling dinosaur here, and I would argue that these were created on day 6 with all of the land-dwelling dinosaurs, while the aquatic dinosaurs and the bird dinosaurs would have been created on day 5. Verse 24b, and it was so. So God made the beast of the earth according to their kinds, everything according to its kinds, and God saw that it was good. God has created supernaturally. He has created out of nothing. He has created amazing complexity. He has created DNA loaded with the information about each animal. The world is now fully prepared for God's highest creation, the crown of his creation, man, which will be made in his image. Now, we did not get very far here, and so we won't get very far tonight, but we will crack open that first verse. And that's all I did in Sunday school. I hit the first verse, and then I wanted to start talking about it. God said, let us make man in our likeness. Here, it's clear we have a hint at the triune nature of God. But I would be more specific. Probably not a hint at the triune nature of God, but a hint at the uniplurality of the single, one, true, and living God. And it's hinted here in this idea of let us make man in our image, after our likeness. God is not conferring with the angels. He is not bringing a court together to confer with the animals. Rather, we have a glimpse into the Godhead. As God says for us, let us make man in our image. Now, my ESV Study Bible says this is the first hint of the Trinity in the Bible. I would disagree. Remember, the word translated God here, used 32 times in 31 verses, Elohim, ending in that im, is a plural noun. You see, the very moment we cracked open Genesis, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Elohim, we were already being presented, whether we recognized it or not, with the uniplurality of the single God. Now, this will not get fully developed into the New Testament, but we have it here tucked away even in Genesis 1 in multiple places. Now, maybe this idea of God speaking to himself seems a little strange to you. And again, God is doing this for our behalf. We're getting this for our own edification and our own learning. But it is not uncommon. Let me show you just a couple of examples. Psalm 2, 1 through 8. Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against Yahweh and against his anointed, saying, this is exactly what happened when Christ came. This is exactly what they did. Verse 3, let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord holds them in derision. Then he will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury. And here's what he will say. As for me, Yahweh said, I have set my king, the Christ, on Zion, my holy hill. I will tell the decree, Jesus says. Yahweh said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage and the ends of the earth your possession. Here we have a broad discussion that's occurring between the Father and the Son, but we are given a glimpse into it for our own edification. But even the one that Jesus used, Psalm 110, to stump the scribes and the Pharisees. Yahweh says to Adonai. The Lord says to David's Lord. The Lord says to our Lord. Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. So again, here we are given a glimpse into the triune God, the uniplurality of God. Let us make man, Adam, in our image. Let us make. And here we have the triune God together, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, setting about to make the first man and the first woman, Adam. And so I'll end with this and then wrap it up with just something I said earlier, but just to remind you. So Adam can be used at times to refer to the one man, Adam. That was his name. Equally, the word Adam can be used to refer to males, human males. But it can also be, and context determines which one it is, it can be used to refer to men and women, as it is here. But here we see that God made men and women, the first man and the first woman, in his image. Two things I want to say, and I'm going to wrap it up. I'd said something earlier in the class. I don't remember where exactly I said it, but I do want to say it here. We will see this in chapter 2, but God made bazillions, I don't even know the number of fish and birds and various land dwellers. He made one man that he breathed into the breath of life. And out of that one man, he then made, out of his side, one woman. The creation of man and woman was very personal. It was very intimate. And it reminds us of God's great love for us. Even when he made us, it was totally different than when he made all the other animals. And then lastly, as we wrap up here, I would remind you, as we consider all that we've talked about, and the time flew away in the Sunday school class. Didn't get near as far as I wanted. But when we dive into the complexity of the cell, when we behold all those miniature, micro, biological machines, we should stand in awe at what our God has done. It should blow our minds. Okay, so until we meet again in Sunday school, we're going to pick right back up here. Then God said, let us make man in our image. So that's where we're going to go. We're going to grab in our image and after our likeness, and we're going to continue to develop all that God has to say. And we will definitely, Lord willing, get through chapter 1 next week. But may the Lord bless you and keep you. May He make His face to shine upon you, and may He give you His peace. Look forward to seeing you guys in Sunday school class. God bless you.